The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, the newest game in the beloved Legend of Zelda franchise, came out today. And I was really looking forward to this one despite the fact that I wouldn't necessarily call myself a fully fledged fan of the franchise or a card-carrying member of the fandom or anything like that. The first Zelda game that I played, like a lot of people, was Breath of the Wild way back in 2017, and then the only other game I played in the franchise was Tears of the Kingdom. And I liked those games a lot, but that's about where my knowledge for the franchise ends. So when Nintendo revealed the first trailer for Echoes of Wisdom, I was equally hyped, curious, and skeptical. I was hyped because in those trailers the gameplay looked really fun and really unique. The idea that you can basically save the recipes for anything you see, from rocks to goblins, just sounded wicked cool and creative and made the core gameplay and replayability sound almost limitless. And I was a little skeptical because it was going to be the first Legend of Zelda game that I played that wasn't in the style of these two games, and I was a little worried that I wasn't going to like Echoes of Wisdom and it was going to be revealed to myself that maybe I'm not a fan of the franchise overall and instead I'm just a fan of these games. And the reason why I thought maybe I wouldn't like Echoes of Wisdom is because, generally speaking, games of this style don't really appeal to me much at all. I don't really know the term for it, but what I mean when I say games of this style, I mean games that are top down like this, and the map kind of looks like a board game board. Just basically the old school action RPG style I'm not too fond of. But anyways, like I said, Echoes of Wisdom came out today, and I've been playing it a lot for hours, which means I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you. So I'm going to jump into the review. I'm going to show you guys some raw gameplay, but before I do that, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, if you're new here. I talk about video games all the time on this channel. I do day one reviews just like this. I do other video game discussions. But anyway, enough with this introduction. Let's talk about Echoes of Wisdom. So first off, this is a first impressions review. This is a small channel. I don't get early access or anything like that. I went to the store when they opened to get my copy just like everybody else. But like I said, I have been playing it for hours now. And if you're anything like me, you want to know a game is good from the start. You don't like being told that a game gets good after 20 plus hours of gameplay. And also, this video will be mostly spoiler free. I will talk about the story, but I won't get into any super specific detail. And all of the gameplay that you're seeing is from the first 3.5 to 4.5 hours, give or take how quickly you play a game. But anyways, with all that being said, let's talk about the story first, because practically every gameplay feature is directly linked to the narrative. Again, I'm just going to tell you the gist of the story, the core setup, but you start the game as Link, who is trying to save Princess Zelda from some evil villain, and he does manage to help her escape, but not before being sucked into some creepy purple void and transported to some otherworldly dimension. Then as Zelda, you return to Hyrule Castle, where everyone is just ecstatic to see you and hyped as hell that you're alive, including your father, the King of Hyrule. But the celebrations are cut short when another purple void rift opens up in the heart of the castle and sucks in the king and two of his closest companions, and then the rift proceeds to throw them right back up again, but they are different. They're acting strange, almost as if they're evil clones of themselves. And the king then immediately accuses Zelda of being responsible for the rifts and tells the guards to lock her up as he preps for her execution. But of course, with the little help of a little fairy companion, Zelda escapes and begins her journey to save Hyrule and solve the mystery behind what's going on. She needs to save Hyrule because these purple rifts are popping up all over the land and sucking in people and locations into the void. And I gotta be honest, I really loved this setup for this narrative. It really hooked me, and it had me eager to see each next step of the story, so much so that on paper, it's the best start to a narrative out of the 3 Legend of Zelda games that I've played. Again, I liked Breath of the Wild, and I really liked Tears of the Kingdom, and I think they both have really good stories being told within them, but I never loved either of those narratives, mainly because of the way they were told, not what they were telling, and I wouldn't call it a flaw in those games or anything like that. They just had a hard time clicking with me personally, but the story here in Echoes of Wisdom did more to immediately hook me in its first 1 hour than Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom did in its first 10 hours. But with that being said, do I think the story here will be as nuanced and deep and multi-layered as those two other games? No, not at all. I think it's going to be a lot more straightforward and simple, and some people may not like that as much, but for me, I think it'll work out in this game's favor. But another thing I really like about this plot is that it's kind of spooky at times. I wasn't expecting that. Don't get me wrong. This isn't a horror game or anything like that. You're not going to throw your Switch into the air as you reach for a crucifix, but it does have a spooky edge to it. The whole idea of these rifts consuming people and spitting out evil clones to try and take control is just whack. Good whack, not bad whack. And in the game, you often enter these rifts and go to the alternate dimension, and the whole vibe there is really kind of creepy. For example, you often come across villagers that got eaten up by the rifts, but they're just like statues. They don't move. Their eyes are open, but they're not responsive. It's pretty unnerving, and it really matches the season, the fall vibe. Halloween is soon. Again, not Texas Chainsaw Massacre unnerving, but for a Nintendo game where the characters look like little plastic toys, it has more of an edge than I was expecting, and I hope the game and the narrative maintains that throughout. Now let's talk about the gameplay. Like I said in the intro, I thought the gameplay looked fun based on the trailers, but it's way more fun and way more addicting and way more rewarding than I was expecting. I'm honestly pretty addicted. It was kind of hard to stop so I could record this review, but the core hook of the gameplay is that Zelda gets a wand, and she's able to make echoes of most of the things that she sees. So for example, if you see a table and a box, you can save those to your list of echoes. Then if you see a ledge or a cliff or something that you can't get to, you can summon a box and a table and use them as a makeshift staircase to reach the destination. And that's the most simple, mundane way of using echoes, but there's a lot of different echoes you acquire and a ton of different ways to use them. There's a spider that you can throw onto a wall, or onto a ceiling, I mean, and then you can use its web like a ladder. There's rocks and boulders that you can drop off of ledges to open up areas that are blocked off, or onto enemies' heads. There are torches that you can manifest when you're in a darker area, like caves and dungeons, but it's not just inanimate objects. Once you defeat an enemy, you can then capture their echo, and you can summon them to fight for you whenever you want, and that's probably what I had the most fun doing in this game so far. If I saw little green goo guys, I'd summon some bats so they could just fly into them and take them out kamikaze style. If I saw a big beefy dude with a shield and a spear, I'd often summon a little white ball that has flame for hair, and I'd chuck it in the direction of the enemies to light them ablaze. If there was a room full of enemies, I like to summon the giant plant looking thing that protrudes 4 spikes before spinning around in a circle like a helicopter blade and deals massive AoE damage. But a quick side note, I apologize that I don't know the correct name for most of these Hyrulean creatures, but I hope you get what I mean. But anyway, where a lot of the fun in this game comes from is the trial and error of figuring out what enemy echoes are the best to counter the real enemies. Like, there were a few times when I happened upon a new enemy type and I sent out my bats like I typically do, and they were absolutely useless. Then I sent out the aforementioned fireball dude, and for once he wasn't doing nearly enough damage, even though he was typically my ace in the hole. And it was really fun being chased around by this enemy, trying to dodge it, trying not to die, while I was testing out all my echoes to figure out what one was best. Combat at times can feel like a big hectic game of rock, paper, scissors. It's really fun. Not that you need to use certain echoes to kill certain enemies, by the way. The game doesn't limit you in that regard. I'm sure I could have killed that enemy with the bats if I kept trying and I gave myself a height advantage. The game does a really good job at making the player feel like they are figuring stuff out on their own, from combat to puzzles as well. Never did I feel like I had to do anything a certain way in order to succeed. But even though I love using echoes as the primary form of combat, I was surprised to learn that that's not the only way. As Zelda, you can actually be hands-on with the combat at times as well, and fair warning, I don't know if what I'm about to talk about is a spoiler or not. This happens very early on in the game, within the first hour and a half. I just don't know if it was revealed in the trailers or any of the marketing. Again, I don't really think it's a spoiler. I think it's a great selling point for the game, but if you don't want to know, skip ahead about a minute. But anyway, pretty early on in the game, you end up fighting the otherworldly, brainwashed version of Link, and when you defeat him, you get his sword. And Zelda can use this sword to partake in combat herself, and I just loved that this was a feature in the game. Like I said, I loved using the echoes for combat, but part of me wondered if that would be enough to carry the gameplay throughout the whole duration of the game, but the fact that you can mix it up with some old school sword and shield combat erased any doubt that I had. You don't get to use the sword whenever you want though. You have to find energy, and when you're using the sword, the energy depletes, and you'll have to find more before you can use it again. There are some other really cool gameplay features as well that I don't want to spoil because of the way that you find them and learn them. I was excited to see that even a good handful of hours into the game, I was still learning new things, and gameplay was still changing up in some pretty big ways. But anyways, are there any cons with the game so far? Do I have any criticisms? I do, but as of now, not that many, if I'm being completely honest. The biggest criticism isn't about the story or the gameplay or anything about the fundamentals of the game, but instead with the performance. For me, I didn't experience anything game-breaking or detrimental, and I certainly didn't experience anything that lessened my enjoyment, but the game does have some pretty low frame rates, both handheld and docked, and I know the Switch is far from a powerhouse of a system, and most games on the Switch aren't gonna necessarily perform well, especially for today's gaming standards, but even for a Switch game, I noticed that Echoes of Wisdom seemed to be lacking in the frame rate department, but luckily, whenever I noticed that, I immediately stopped noticing it like 10 seconds later because I just got sucked back into the game because it was so fun. So for me, the frame rate issues were easy to overlook and to ignore, but I know a lot of people notice stuff like that a lot more than I do, so if you care about frame rate and your eyes are able to hyper focus on stuff like that, just be warned. Also, the game is pretty easy so far. I died once, and that's because I accidentally fell off of a ledge. Echoes of Wisdom is far from a hard game, and I have a feeling a lot of people might be a little disappointed with the lack of challenge, but for me, I don't really mind so far because I love the pacing the game has, but I do want it to become more challenging as I progress, and I really hope that it does. But anyways, I went into Echoes of Wisdom without high expectations. Like I said, I thought the game looked fun, I thought the gameplay looked cool, but I really wasn't expecting much. But I'm gonna be honest with you, based on the handful of hours that I've been playing today, it's probably gonna end up being one of my favorite games of the year. And if the game manages to maintain this momentum throughout its whole runtime, it may be better to me than Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and I can't believe that I'm saying that, but I'm having a lot of fun with Echoes of Wisdom. It's really, really surprising me, and I think it's gonna genuinely surprise a lot of people who go into this game, especially if you go in with lower expectations. Don't expect a big epic like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Expect a more refined experience with really good pacing and really fun gameplay and a surprisingly good story. But anyways, that's my quick and brief thoughts after playing the game for the better part of the day. Depending on how this video performs, I will make a follow-up after I put in a lot more hours, so let me know if you'd be interested in that, and consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.